Welcome to In the News for Friday, November 3rd, 2023. I am Brett Burney from appsandlaw.com.
And this is Jeff Richardson from iPhone JD. Hey, Brett.
Good morning, Jeff. Monday was just a few days ago.
It was.
And we were up late. Well, I guess not too late. They made it be in, I stayed up and watched the exactly 30 minutes of the announcements that Apple had, kind of like this surprise announcement. And we were all speculating last week about what it could be. Pretty interesting stuff. Nothing that I think would, rattle the world from the perspective of an iPad or an iPhone. But if you're a Mac user, you were probably pretty happy last Monday. We had the introduction of the M3 Apple Silicon processors that came out, and not just one, but 3 M3 processors.
Yeah. So, new MacBook Pros. And I guess it's interesting that there was the second time in the calendar year that Apple introduced a new MacBook Pro. But that may be because the ones that they introduced earlier this year were probably supposed to come out last year and they were a little bit late. But yeah, so we got some new MacBook Pros for the end of the year with the new M3 processor. The iMac, which had been running the M1, was updated to run the M3, so it's much faster. So yeah, so a nice little bump for the Macs.
Yeah, really. I mean, it was all about just the new processors, which again, as Apple is prone to do, they showed some pretty creative visuals about how much faster it is than some of those. But I got to tell you, I'm watching that. I was getting a little bit of FOMO because I'm still running an M1 MacBook Pro, and the M3s look pretty good. If there was one big surprise, it was probably what is known as the new black MacBook Pro. Like, you can get it in a color, although we have heard folks that have already been able to put their hands on it that it's really a very, very, very dark gray, if you will. It's not like a matte black like we've had in the past on there, but that was interesting. But the most interesting thing came at the very end of the exact 30-minute announcement, Jeff. And I know you and I both caught it because we texted each other immediately.
Yeah.
But everyone else actually caught it as well. At the very end of this amazing 30-minute spectacular, and you could talk about how you were watching it as well. I was just looking at it on my computer, and it looked fantastic. But at the very, very end of this, a very tiny fine print, maybe not so tiny, but tiny enough that if you weren't looking for it, you would have missed it. The entire thing was shot on an iPhone 15 Pro. Incredible.
Yeah, I was watching it. I mean, normally these are during the day, so I'm watching it in my office, sometimes on my computer screen, which is not very high quality, and sometimes on my iPad, which is better quality. But because this was a nighttime presentation, I was watching it at home in my TV room. So I had my huge, big 4K HDR television. And as I was watching the show, I mean, it was interesting to see about the new Macs, but I was really interested in how just beautiful it was. I mean, even though it was nighttime shots, it was just, and that was literally my biggest impression is, wow, they did a great job filming this. And so since that was my main thought throughout the 30 minutes, to then see in the last 10 seconds that the whole thing was shot on the same iPhone that I'm holding in my hand right now, I'm like, oh my goodness. I mean, that's incredible video quality. So I thought that was the most amazing thing to me. And I thought it was fun that Apple released this video showing it. And, and I've heard people say, well, when you look at the behind the scenes video, you see that, it's not, some guy just sitting there holding their iPhone, telling Tim Cook
with
to
a flashlight.
Smile.
Yeah,
exactly. No, I mean, they have a huge setup. I mean, one of the cranes there apparently costs like $250,000 if you bought one.
Right.
I mean, these are major things holding the iPad perfectly. But again, for me, that's fine because whenever people film stuff, professionally, whether it's a movie or a professionally done commercial video, they're going to have all of those, rigs and crane operators and microphones and lights and everything else. But the difference is traditionally you would have like a major camera, like a $20,000 camera in there. Right. And now they're getting incredible film quality on the iPhone. And it's because of the new things that were made possible in the iPhone, the newest iPhone, the Pro version, because, for example, you can record directly to an SSD at the very highest quality. You can use these ProRes, I guess it's called, to get and this is, beyond the video that I would do when I make home videos of my kids, but still it just shows the power of the camera and what you can do with it, which I thought was really, really cool. I got a chance to try it out, a good use of my camera the other day. My son recently had a birthday, and there was this huge go-kart track in New Orleans, and we went, him and a bunch of his buddies were riding these go-karts around this incredibly huge track. But so I mean, I'm just sort of in the stands looking at them. and using my iPhone 15 Pro Max, because it has
Right.
that 5x lens, even when the go-karts were like way across, I could zoom in and I could see them perfectly. And I remember thinking, I literally could not have made this video of them, this, silly little home video, with my
Right.
prior iPhone, because it would have been a lot blurrier because I couldn't zoom in as much. So that's the 5x lens. And of course, the regular lens is great too, and which is what Apple used here. So again, I'm not going to reproduce all the stuff that they use, but just the idea that we've now gotten to the point that you could use the lens on the
Yeah.
camera that's in your pocket to make something that looks incredibly good, as evidenced by this video.
Right.
That says a lot. That says a lot.
Even in this behind the scenes video, which I got to tell you, I think we texted that immediately after we saw that. Like, I want to see the behind the scenes video on how they made this, because we did suspect, right? We did suspect they were going to be using some equipment. And, to their credit, I mean, they probably did it on purpose, knowing that people would like to see these behind the scenes videos, because we get these videos when we see other little vignette films, right, that have been filmed on the iPhone, but I mean, all of that is so telling. And even in this behind the scenes video, some of these very, very professional and proficient, filmmakers, I mean, this is what they have been doing for many, many years, and that they're even amazed at the quality of the footage that has come off the iPhone, or the ability that they have now to be able to use the iPhone, even to record things like just like you said, would have, been on cameras that would have cost, many, many thousands of dollars. Just amazing to kind of see this evolution. And I love this subtle marketing ploy that Apple has kind of come up with. Like, they're shooting it on the iPhone, and then they're giving you behind the scenes. Like you said, I'm not going to go spend, $500,000 to buy this rig and all these lighting and everything like that. But I could, and like, just the idea that it's possible and that it's there is pretty neat. Just seeing some of this equipment there, and just even the ability, like, I know this is the video editor that they have in part of this little vignette, and he's just talking about how it's, I guess the log, right? I know we talked about this, or that version of the video that is kind of flat, that they can basically make it colored in any way that they want, is great. But even if you haven't seen the actual video, don't see the behind the scenes video. Go watch the real video first, because I thought there was some very cute Easter eggs. My favorite is when they were shooting into like the bat cave of, is it Johnny Saruji? Is that his name? And he's like, "Welcome to my lab." And he's got a little bit of an accent that I was just thinking, wow, he's the Dracula of Apple now. And so anyway, it's just a cute video, the way that they showed it, and I'm glad that they put the behind the scenes video on there as well.
They did a nice job playing off the fact that it was the day before Halloween, and that probably had something to do with the fact that it was the black MacBook Pro too, just sort of a nighttime theme. So
of course,
it was fun. It was cute. I'm glad that Apple mixed it up and did something a little different.
Happy birthday to Microsoft Word.
Indeed.
Those are words that I don't really typically think that I would say, but you linked to a post, because this past week, Microsoft Word actually turned 40 years old. That's a little insane.
It's a little curious to me that they had it last week, because if I linked to this very old article from InfoWorld that Microsoft Word was technically announced in spring of '83. I don't know what date it came out in, but sometime, at some point during the year, it did come out in 1983, and Microsoft decided to make a big deal about it a few days ago. So this is a good opportunity for us to talk about it. That Microsoft Word has been, I mean, for some professions, people that write all the time. My profession of a lawyer being a perfect example of it. I mean, I live in Microsoft Word. I am there every single day. I know all of the commands. I mean, I'm always impressed when I see like people that really know about photography can use Photoshop like a whiz, and I'm like, wow, how do you know how to do all that stuff? When it comes to Word, I know
you're the whiz,
because you're
the word whiz.
I mean, I've literally been doing it since I was a teenager, and so as it's changed over the years, and I remember the days in the 1980s when Word was on the Mac before it was on Windows. In fact, Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Excel actually debuted on the Mac. So in the early days, the Mac was very important to Word, and Word was very important to the Mac. It was a symbiotic relationship. And then there was the dark days of the early 90s when Microsoft went from Word 5.1a, which was so good, to Word 6, where they tried to sort of make the Windows and the Mac version the same, which really took away a lot of the special what made Word so good on Mac. But then Microsoft came back years later, and all come culminating in the keynote address where Bill Gates appeared on stage on that huge screen behind Steve Jobs. So there's been this relationship between, Apple products, the Mac and the iPhone and the iPad with Word over the years. But, regardless of where it is, I mean, I use Word on my Windows computer every day. I use Word on my iPad just about every day. I'm constantly opening up Word documents on my iPhone. You and I were together years ago at Tech Show, Brett, when Microsoft Word came out for the iPad. And that was such a big announcement because for years there had been these third-party apps that you could use to view Word documents, but none of them were great. They were all, Docs to Go was probably the best of them, but they were all sort of hacky. So when Microsoft came out with the true blue version of Word on the iPad, it made such a big deal. And for some professionals like attorneys, I really think it was one of the biggest app announcements ever.
Agreed.
So it was, there's a long history with Word, and I'm glad to still be using it today. It's incredibly useful.
I love this little graphic that Microsoft put in here, the 40 years of Microsoft Word, this timeline. I've been zooming in and out of it here because, frankly, for me, just being a visual guy, Jeff, I like seeing all the little logos or the icons over
every
the
one
years.
of those icons. At one point in my life,
they're burned in my brain.
I clicked on all the time. Exactly.
Exactly. They're burned into my brain.
Yeah. I mean, you hover your mouse over Word 97 and 98. Yep, I knew that icon too.
Exactly.
Word 2003. Yep, I knew that icon too. So it's funny.
Just amazing how it burns in. You actually linked to another good article here from Tidbits, and I'll make sure it's in the show notes here, where they're just talking about, it used to be like the multi-word tool. I mean, that was an MS-DOS. I mean, wow, this is it's fun memories, but it's a little bit of trauma that happens for me a little bit as well. It's like, wow, that's been around for a long time. That's not the only birthday, my friend. I just want to tell you happy birthday to In the News, or to the iPhone GD. This is your 700th post. Is that right? Am I getting that correctly? Of In the News?
Of In the News, yeah. So it was back in 2000.
Oh, my goodness.
2009 that I said, maybe it's a Friday. There was not much else going on. Maybe I'll talk about some of the news items. And, then I started doing it every week. And then, as years ago, you picked up on the fact that, hey, if Jeff's going to write about the articles from the news from the last week, maybe let's turn it into a podcast. And here we are.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't know, it's just a number, but still it's sort of fun that it's been 700 times that I've been doing it.
You have done it.
That's a lot of weeks.
Well, keep on going for another 700, my friend. I'm excited about it. I like it. Apple Watch OS 10, or the watchOS 10. The Apple Watch 10 is not out. Sorry, I said that wrong. It's Apple Watch 9 is the latest version, but it's running watchOS 10, and I am so happy that you linked to this story, or this really review, I guess, major review in MacStories by Alex Guyot, I believe, which I know he's been doing some really great stuff over on MacStories. This is a wonderful thing. Like, I've saved it because I got to read through it again, I think, Jeff. There's so much in here that I think you even commented this when in your post today, in your 700th in the news post, that it's like, wow, I didn't even, really realize that watchOS 10 had all of these changes. I thought Alex did a really good job of being fair about it. Like, there's some things that are not as good, maybe, that they changed on some of the buttons and things, but the interface, I think, to his point on some of these things, have some really nice improvements here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I also, watchOS 10 it's the newest operating system. I don't necessarily know that I agree with every one of Apple's decisions, but they did what they did. And it's a major overhaul. And so this is what we're going to be living with probably for the next couple of years. I thought this article was fantastic because even though, of course, I knew there was a new version of the operating system out, and I knew some of the things that were changed, it wasn't until I read this article that I truly understand, okay, here's what they're doing. Here's sort of the Apple philosophy, and here's how I can take advantage of it. So just to give you one example, as the article points out, when you scroll up from the bottom of your Apple Watch screen, you get to what Apple calls the Smart Stack. And up until before I read this article, I saw those things down there and I'm like, okay, whatever, there's some little widgets. I didn't think much of it. But what the article made me realize is if you want to be a power user, what I recommend that you do is go in there and pay attention to what's in the stack. Because just like a stack of widgets on your iPhone, you can control which widgets show up in the stack. So take out the ones that you don't care about add
Right.
in the ones that you do care about. And then what you suddenly have is every time you swipe up from the bottom of your phone, or if you use your little, you can also just scroll on the scroll wheel on the side, you will see these little bitty widgets that correspond to the apps that mean the most to you. Maybe it's looking at your circles for your activity, or maybe it's looking at the now playing app, or, the weather,
Right.
whatever things you want to see most quickly. And so just like you can put complications on your watch face to quickly get
Yes.
information, you can scroll up. And the nice thing about the smart stack is that even if you're using, like, let's say, for example, I'm in a silly mood and I want to put the Snoopy watch face on just because the Snoopy animations make me laugh, but the
Right.
Snoopy watch face doesn't have a space for any complications. And so normally I would say, oh, well, the downside of that watch face
Yeah.
is I'm losing quick access to these things, but you still have it, because just put the ones that matter to you, the things that you might normally put as complications in your watch face, put them into your widgets under the smart stack, and you can scroll up and quickly get to them. So I mean, that's just one example of, if you, it does take some time for you to think about it, but once you go through and set it up the way that makes sense to you, suddenly your Apple Watch becomes infinitely more useful. So that was one that was good. And then the other thing, the one that I pointed out is, and I had sort of forgotten about this, the digital crown, if you double press it, it will bring up, it's sort of like hitting, control tab on Windows or command tab on a Mac. It brings up your recent applications, your recent apps. And so if you want to jump to something that you've gone to recently, like, your podcast app or whatever it is, that's a quick way to get access to it without having to scroll through the big list of all the apps, or to go through the honeycomb, whichever setup you have. So, even just if those little tips, those two tips are the only things you take away from it, and there's much, much more in this article, you will suddenly be getting so much more out of your Apple Watch. So I'm so happy that this article, I mean, Alex writes a review of the macOS every year, but I was so happy to read this one because this is a big year. Apple did change a lot this year. And there are some things like, for example, the fact that you press the button on the right side of your watch and you bring up the control panel. I mean, that is useful. Is that the best use of that button? I don't know, but it is what it is. Again, whether you agree or disagree, though, this is the world that we're living in. So why not take the time to make it, work best for you and get the most out of it?
I definitely agree on that smart stack. I didn't know what it was going to, how it was going to be useful when I was looking at it before, but now, even though I'm using the ultra face, I forget what they call it. It's like ultra modular or whatever it is. Yeah. So I've got 7 complications now on my face. But Jeff, that's not enough, because there are a few that I wanted to actually put on there even more. And the way that I did that is I put it on the smart stack. So as soon as I just barely, scroll up on my digital crown, I've got now a little, whatever you call it. I guess it's one of the widgets there. And I've got 3 additional other complications that are available there. In other words, it's just an easy way for me to still have access to more widgets there. And I love that. I think that that's been great. So I'm thrilled to see that Alex put this in there. One of the things, just quickly, that I found that I think is fantastic on watchOS 10 is one of the additional widgets I did put on my smart stack is messages. Have you been into the messages app on the watchOS 10? Because I now have my little pictures on there. I may have mentioned this before, but I just love that in my messages now. Before, it was just a list of the actual messages, but I now have faces of all the people, from my favorites, like I would see on my phone. And I just love that there's a little tiny Jeff Richardson picture on my watch there that I can tap if I wanted to text. I feel like the messages app in watchOS 10 got a lot of love. I think Alex may have mentioned that somewhere in here, but that was some really good stuff.
Good stuff.
Let's go to iPhone from watchOS. I like this little story here. 6 hidden iPhone 15 features that you need to discover right now. My favorite was also yours that you pointed out about the battery.
Yeah, just because this is something new, and I think it's just for the iPhone 15 line. But if you go to, if you go to settings and then general and then about, you can see this thing about the battery, and it shows you just scroll past it, but it shows you the date, the manufacturer date of your battery, the first use. So for example, for my iPhone 15 Pro Max, it said that the manufacturer date was August. It said my first use was September, which I guess is the same thing that you're showing on the screen right here.
Right.
And then my cycle count, I'm not exactly sure what cycle count is. Is that how many times it's been recharged from zero or something like that?
I think it's something like that. Yeah.
When I checked from yesterday, mine was like 26 or something like that. So again, I have to admit, I don't know exactly what all this information means, but it does give you a little more behind the scenes information about your battery. And if you are having battery problems, which, for the newest iPhones, hopefully you're not because they're brand new, but come a year or two from now, if you start to have issues, I guess this is information that you'll be able to compare your battery to someone else's and maybe see a reason that your battery might be more in need for, replacement or whatever else. So again, how this information will be useful to the user is yet to be seen. But the fact that Apple is surfacing it in the first place is something brand new and I think very interesting.
Yeah, good story there. I appreciate you linking to that. And by the way, I just have to say, I've been using my iPhone 15 Pro for maybe about 2.5 weeks or so. And if you recall, I would complain every so often about my 14 Pro, about the battery. Like I felt like it wasn't holding the battery as well as I would have expected it to. I've been much happier with the iPhone 15 Pro. There's nothing scientific about that. It's just me saying, hey, I'm a little bit happier with what's coming on
here. Well, I'll tell you something too, Brett. This is the first time, as you know, that I've had the biggest iPhone, which of course has more space for a battery. So it's got more battery life. And I have absolutely noticed that the battery life, it's good. Even days that I'm, doing workouts and recording video and everything else, the end of the day, I still have so much battery life. I'm like, oh my goodness. It's crazy.
Agreed. Let's talk Wi-Fi now. You linked to a story in TechCrunch about eero. Is this Amazon now? Eero is Amazon,
yes,
right?
Amazon
Google has
Eero.
Nest.
They bought the company.
So, Amazon has Eero. This looks like it's the highest end Eero that you can get. You, I think, have one that's not quite this same, but I know you have been very happy with your setup on there. But if you wanted to go a little higher, here's a good option for you.
Yeah, I thought this was a fascinating article, and I had been looking for an article like this, so I was so thrilled to see that it was in TechCrunch because we have Wi-Fi improves every couple of years, and so now we're up to Wi-Fi 7, and a lot of the things that Wi-Fi 7 brings to the table are things that I guess any of us could use it if we just buy the right technology. But like, for example, I don't even know if our newest iPhones work with iPhone 7. I have to look at the specifics of it. I think the new Macs that came out that were announced this week do. But again, we are getting to a world where, everything will communicate with it. But what can work with the newest Wi-Fi 7 is the different Eeros can communicate with each other throughout the house. So anyway, this article does a great job of explaining what makes this Eero so special. It's expensive. It's like $600 for a unit, but they're also a lot more powerful. So the Eeros that I have from a couple of years ago called the Eero Pro, I forget what number they were. I had a link in my post to the version I have. They don't even sell the version I have anymore, but I have 3 of them in my house, and my house is like a 2-story house. It's, I don't know, about 3,500 square feet, and 2 was close to being covering everything. 3 of them totally covers my entire house, right?
Oh, good.
But with this newest Eero, because they are much more powerful, you could almost get away with 1 of them, or certainly for 2. And so, you do get more for the buck. But again, to get 2 of them at $600 a piece, that's $1,200 in your Wi-Fi routers, which is, a serious money. But this article explains what you get for it and how it's future proof. But I'll also emphasize things like you really want to have super fast internet to really take advantage of this. At my house, I have what I consider to be pretty fast internet, which is gigabit internet, but you need to have 2 gigabit or 3 gigabit internet to your home or to your office, whatever, before you're going to really take advantage of this stuff. If you just have a gigabit connection like I do, or maybe something less, this is overkill for you. But maybe you want to get it now, knowing that maybe in the next year or 2, your internet connection will improve. People buy things for future proofing all the time. So this article, but anyway, it does a good job of explaining what it's about. I will say though, that whatever model you're getting, if you're in the market for a new Wi-Fi router, and it is nice to update them every once in a while, the Eeros are really good. One of the first things you said when you pulled this article up, Brett, you said, aren't they owned by Amazon? They are. And it breaks my heart a little bit when you say that, because there are rumors, that I'm sure you've heard, that years ago, Apple looked at this and thought about buying Eero. And oh gosh, I wish they had, because Apple, they used to have the what were the Apple products called?
Oh, the airport.
The airport products, which were so good because they took something complicated, networking, and made it so simple to use. And Eero has the same philosophy. They've really tried to make it so simple that it's idiot proof, but you have controls over it. Amazon has been a pretty good steward for Eero so far. Don't get me wrong. I'm not criticizing Amazon, but I do. If Apple had purchased Eero instead and had maybe integrated them with the HomePods or who knows what else, I would have loved that to happen. But wasn't meant to be. Maybe in a parallel universe out there somewhere, Apple owns Eero and it's got some great home devices. But in the world that we live in, it's an Amazon product.
The iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max support Wi-Fi 6E connectivity.
There we go. Okay.
The iPhone 15s, right? The iPhone 15s only support Wi-Fi 6, so we would have access to 6E. But anyway, so if you're looking at this Eero for your iPhone, probably not the best the best option right now. Yeah. But to your point, I mean, some people just like to go and get the best out there because they want to make sure that it can stay, the course for several years. And I'm glad that you linked to it. Yeah, you've pretty much sold me on to Eero. When I'm ready to upgrade, I will probably be doing that just because of the way that you've been talking about it all this time. Maybe you'll upgrade to the Eve Motion as well. The best HomeKit motion sensor, Benjamin Mayo at 9 to 5 Max says. I still don't have any motion sensors, but I think he's done a good job of selling me on this one as well. This is the Eve Motion.
Yeah, when you think of, having a smart home, the most basic thing is to just have like something that you turn lights on and off. But when you start to get a little bit more sophisticated, having a motion detector is one of those sort of next step things. The one that I use was sent to me by Eve as a review unit years ago, and so I decided to try it out. But it is actually as cool. I mean, as I described it, I have it set up in my television room, which is sort of in the back of my house, that, when you walk in the room, when it notices you come in, the lights come on, which is a simple little thing, but it's very nice. In fact, I noticed about a month ago, it stopped working. And I'm like, what's going on? I'm like, is it a HomeKit? Is it whatever? And then I literally just realized this past weekend, Brett, I'm like, I wonder if the batteries are dead. And sure enough, after using it for like so many years, you do have to replace AA batteries. In case you're curious, they do not live forever.
Thank you.
The rumors are false. And so all I did is I popped out the 2 AA batteries, put some new ones in, and now, hey, I'm back in motion again. I walk in the room and the lights come on. So, but the fact that it had been those 2 batteries worked for so long, I just didn't even think about them being in there.
I'm glad you thought about that immediately instead of like, spending 5 hours trying to figure it out, like rebooting everything. Yeah, that's good.
And I'm using an older version of it. The one that he reviews here is even newer. So if you're looking to add a motion detector to your house, this might be one that you want to consider. And it is sort of nice. I mean, you can also use it for security features too, right? Like you could have like many cameras have a have it built in, but you can have it in fact, one of the automations that I have for my backyard is because my it's not Eve, it's my Eufy cameras. Not only can they record what's going on in my backyard, but they have a motion detector too. And so I have that trigger if at night after a certain hour it senses motion in my backyard. Of course, it starts to record using the Eufy camera, but in addition, I turn on some of my backyard lights so that I don't have to rely upon, Eufy does a pretty good job of recording at night, but it's even better if there's light. So if there were to ever be an intruder in my backyard, there would be a light to hopefully deter them. I could see them, it'd be on camera, et cetera, et cetera. So motion detection is a pretty cool little thing to do HomeKit things with.
Does your Eve Motion that you have right now, Jeff, does it work with HomeKit? Is it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, good. So that's the main thing. I know we keep talking about that. Like when I do get onto this bandwagon, I'll get the Eero, I'll get the Eve Motion, but maybe this is a better place for me to start. And any of you out there that are in my same boat, smart plugs. That's probably like one of the best places to start, Jeff. And I am so glad you linked to this. Step one, exactly. I'm so glad you linked to this, the Verge. I've gone to the Wire Cutter before and other places. And really, the Verge has almost confirmed this for me that when I'm going to start getting some of these, the TP-Link Casa is probably a good place to start. That's their best smart plug overall pick that they have here.
Yeah, and this post is good because it talks about why would you want to consider spending more or spending less on a smart plug? They've got the Casa, which is $25, couldn't be any simpler. But then you have some of the other ones that are like, if you want the really cheapest one, I think they have one that costs as little as
they do.
Yeah. If the $6 makes a difference. But then they have other ones that are more sophisticated that will like monitor the amount of energy that you're using and have some additional features like the one that you're showing off right now by Leviton. One thing you want to consider is, do you just want your smart plug to turn a light on and off? Or
Right.
do you want it to also be able to dim a light? Because
Yeah.
dimming a light used to be simple when we all had analog lights, right? But in today's
Right.
world, that those have been phased out, and now it's all
Right.
LED lights. Not
Right.
every,
Right.
older dimmers don't
That's a good
work great with
point.
LED lights, and so they recommend one that if you know you're going to dim the light, this is a good one to use.
Right.
And I think the end of this article even recommends one to use outside. So no matter where
It
and
does.
what
Yep.
function it is,
Yeah.
whether you want to go from the bottom of the line to
Great
some of the most
article.
expensive, here's a great list of options.
Fantastic. Okay. Thanks for linking to that, because maybe in the next week or two, I might have some smart plugs. I'll get started on my bandwagon. Where are you at? You have a really cool story for where you at that I'll get to in a moment. But Jeff, I got my own where you at story today. So
let's hear your report.
I was flying to Chicago, and I put my roller bag above my seat, just like you are wont to do. So we land in Chicago. I get up and I look and I see my bag is not where I had put it in my overhead.
Oh, no.
But I look across the aisle and I see my bag. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe the flight attendant, after I sat down, maybe they moved it to make sure everything fit. So I grabbed it and I walk off. But as I'm walking up the jetway, it just doesn't feel right. It's like the roller bag doesn't feel quite right. And I'm like, okay, you know what? Once I get out into the airport, like I'm just, double check, just to make sure. And I look down and I'm like, wait a minute, my name tag in the back isn't there. And I'm like,
oh, no.
Oh my goodness, I'm going to unzip it. And that is not my stuff in my bag.
Oh.
Somebody had picked up my bag, and I thought this was my bag because they were exactly identical. It was the exact identical roller bag, Jeff. So immediately I turn around. People are still coming off the airline. I go to the gate agent, and I'm like, I'm telling her the story. I'm like, somebody's got my bag. Like, can I come back on there real quick and just, stop whoever, because apparently they had already taken it. So I didn't even think about that first. I'm like, can I get, and she's like, no, sir, you have to stand right here.
You can't go
and
back
at first
on,
she was kind of icy about it. She was like, no, it'll be fine. We'll wait for the flight attendants to get off. And I'm just standing like right there in front of her face, because I am just starting to panic a little bit right now. And I'm thinking to myself, what am I going to do? Okay, when are the flight attendants finally going to come off this airline? And they finally do. And I asked them, is there any bags on there? Did somebody leave it? Maybe they moved it or something. No dice, of course. The bag was gone. I'm like, how am I going to find it? Somebody asked a question that I can't remember what they asked, but I remembered, of course, I had an AirTag in my roller bag. So I immediately pull it up on my phone. And by this time, the gate agent is getting a little nicer for me, even though she's kind of juggling all the other people getting on for the next flight. And I show her, I said, listen, my bag is right here. And I zoomed in. And of course, this is O'Hare, right? So this is huge. And of course, we're all the way down at the very last gate in the Terminal 1C. So it is the furthest away basically you can get from any of the gates. And I zoom in and I show her, it looks like it, it's a kind of a big circle, right? So it's not exact. And it zooms in on a gate at E1. And so I'm telling the gate agent, like, I think it's right there. It doesn't look like it's moving. And so she calls down there, asks, is anybody, that just came off the Cleveland flight, do you have a roller bag? Well, unfortunately, she found one lady that did come off the Cleveland flight, and she got on the phone, and I could just tell she was scared. She did not have a roller bag. It wasn't her. But my bag still pinged right there at that gate, Jeff. So I'm like, oh my goodness. And then it's 10 minutes, then 12 minutes, and then 14 minutes. So obviously it was the last ping that it had, right? I'm punching it, trying to like make the AirTag make a sound, like anything, something. So no dice. And I'm starting to sweat at this time. The lovely gate agent finally opened up the roller bag that I had. Because I was able to show her it was still in the airport, right? She opens that bag and finds, of all things, the prescription medication of the gentleman.
Oh, that had the person's name. Yes.
That had the person's name. And then she looks it up on her computer. She was able to call his cell phone. And of course, by this time, he's still there, but he is at gate F18, which, if you know anything about O'Hare, it is on the exact, it had to be 2 miles to get there. So I talk with him and I'm like, okay, are you going anywhere? He's like, well, I'm getting on a plane in 11 minutes. I'm like, well, Not if you want your prescription medication. So I am sprinting, like if you remember the OJ sprint through the airport. I get there, I finally get it, and I exchange the bags. I was so relieved, even though it just threw me off for the rest of the day. But as my wife keeps reminding me, at least your bag wasn't in Europe, right? I mean, he was getting on another flight. And, you know, of all things, so it wasn't that the AirTag actually retrieved it for me, but if it wasn't for my AirTag,
still in the,
that was it,
Jeff. Still,
I knew it was in the airport at least, 10 minutes ago, and I could show that to the gate agent so that she knew it was there. And obviously it was still a little bit of investigatory work on her part to actually get in there and make the phone call. But I mean, nobody's going to check their bag when they get off, Jeff. It just happened to be that this gentleman just looked up and he pulled what looked like his bag. So now I'm thinking, okay, what fluorescent ribbon can I put on my bag or something just to give people the idea, like, do not pick this bag unless you like your fluorescent ribbons or something along those lines.
Yeah.
So
I'm glad that you shared that story
to the AirTag.
I mean, we've often talked about AirTags and luggage at airports, but every time that we've done so, it's been in the context of checked luggage.
Yes,
and I always think,
exactly.
because I try to never check luggage. I always try to put it in the overhead compartment just to be a safe.
That's what I did.
And your story reminds me that even when it's in the overhead compartment, the AirTag can still play a role. So that's good to know. Wow.
It was incredible. I mean, I was sweating for the rest of the day. I needed a shower because I just was running the entire length of the O'Hare Airport. But thank you to having an AirTag. If I did not have that, I would not have had the ability to be able to show the gate agent, right? Because it was within the 10 minutes area that we could show that. And at least she made the phone calls and we were able to go and find it. And boy, I was reunited. And the guy was like, he was so apologetic. He's like, man, I wish I could buy you a beer. And I'm like, I got to go take a shower. I'm like, enjoy your flight, sir. Yeah, it was not a pleasant day, but it was a happy ending. And I'm happy about that. All right. So now you're where you're at story. Even though we haven't used this yet, but this could even be cooler because I would like to track the International Space Station sometime myself.
Yeah, there's a lot of really cool space apps for the iPhone that take advantage of the augmented reality so that you can hold your iPhone up to the sky and it tells you what you're looking at. But I thought it was fun that NASA released a new app this week that you can track the International Space Station. So the app itself gives you information about it, but you can have the app give you an alert when the ISS appears overhead, and you can actually track it with this. And I mean, it's always amazing to me that the ISS is way up there in space with astronauts living on it, and yet you can see it with the naked eye go across the sky if it's a clear night. My son has telescopes and stuff, and he's absolutely picked it up on the telescope, so you can see the ISS as far as away as it is, and as tiny as it is. And so with this app, you can find out the next time that it's coming directly over you, and you can take a look at it and just marvel at space, that we have people that are living out there in space.
Well, thank you, NASA, for releasing that app. I think it's just cool that it came from them specifically as well. In the know. Typically, we do iPhone apps, iPhone tips, and I still love those, and I will continue to do those. But I thought this week, Jeff, in honor of Apple releasing a brand new MacBook Pro and the M3 chips and everything, I'm going to give a couple of Mac I guess I'll call them software apps. Here are a couple of utilities actually on my Mac that I cannot do without. There's already, I feel like this list is getting a little longer than what I like, because typically I would just like to have, the base model as possible. But Text Expander, of course, 1Password. There's an app called Paste now that I use, from copying and pasting text. But another one that I just picked up not too long ago is Bartender. So Bartender is a way that I can control how my Mac menu bar looks, if that makes sense. This became a pretty big deal, the last MacBook Pro that I got, that has the little notch in the top, right? Because the notch at the very top where the camera goes on my MacBook Pro will cover up some of my Mac menu bar items. It's not supposed to, but if some of these utilities or software apps, have not been updated, that they will be hidden by the little notch. And that's what pushed me to get Bartender. I've heard about this app for many, many years, and I'm just like, I don't have too many things up in my menu bar. Again, I can't live without it now. It allows me to hide the little icons up in my menu bar when I'm not using them. It allows me to rearrange the ones that I want. It allows me to use some when an app is active. I just absolutely love it. And they just recently came out with Bartender 5. And so there's all kinds of additional options in here that you can pull up, from a styling perspective, and it just gives you all kinds of fantastic control over how your Mac menu bar, especially in the, I keep pointing it up here because it's in the upper right? Mm-hmm. The upper left is really controlled by the actual application you're using and has the file menus and everything, but it's the upper right. Do you want a full date up there? Do you want your how do you want your Wi-Fi symbol to look? The battery symbol, all that kind of stuff, and Bartender will allow you to do that. There's actually here, I've got a great review in MacStories since we were talking about them. I'll put this in the show notes as well, so you can go through and read it. Actually, I get the Bartender as a part of my Set app subscription, Jeff. I think we've talked about a Set app before, but I love using Set app because it gives me, just one subscription. I get access to a ton of applications, and that's how I knew Bartender was in there. It has Paste in there as well. That's another app that I use, but I purchased that separately because it was so good, but that's part of the Set app subscription as well. And then another one that I've been using is AirBuddy. So AirBuddy is a little utility on my Mac that allows me to, control where my AirPods Pro are going. If I want it on my Mac, I can ping it quickly on my Mac, and I've got a keyboard shortcut set up on there. So anyway, those are multiple little utilities, but the main one is Bartender. Really like it a lot. But if you're interested in that, try the Set app subscription. I really just think that they're fantastic. We've talked about them a couple of times because it's from MacPaul, right? Which is based out of Ukraine, and they're doing some really good stuff. They've been doing good stuff for a long time on the Mac. So that's my pick for today.
Yeah, I've heard fantastic things about Bartender over the years. I don't use it because the Mac that I use at home I use it with a 27-inch studio display monitor, and I've got so much space that I don't need it. A lot of space. But if I had a Mac laptop where space is a little bit more of a premium, I absolutely would buy Bartender. No question about it. No question.
Yeah, good stuff.
My tip of the week is a follow-up from last week. Last week, we talked about a preview of the new Beatles song coming out. And this week, it was added to Apple Music and to all the other music services, too, I believe. And it's fun. The new song itself, called Now and Then, it's a really good song. I've enjoyed listening to it. It's been in my ear since it came out. I wanted to say it came out yesterday. In fact, I was driving to work today, and I was listening to a podcast, and at the same time, I could sort of hear the song in my head. I was like, okay, let me play the song again while I'm driving into work because it was fun to listen to. A couple things I want to talk about. First of all, the album itself, Now and Then, it's just a single, but just like the old Beatles singles, you would have a B-side too. And so for the B-side, they have a new remix of just a little song called Love Me Do. Just a simple just one of the best songs of all time.
A little ditty.
Exactly. We'll just stick that on the B-side. So it's fun to hear a perfectly, clear, very nicely remastered version of Love Me Do. But then additionally, as part of the digital album on Apple Music, there is a preview to something that I actually encourage you to watch the full documentary. It's 12 minutes long. You can watch it on Apple Music. You can watch it on YouTube if you want. And it's about the making of Now and Then, because as we talked about last week, this was something that John Lennon first recorded on a cassette tape back in the 70s. And it was only because of using the artificial intelligence AI that Peter Jackson had come up with that they were able to clean up the recording so that you can hear John Lennon's voice crystal clear, and yet he's singing along with George and Ringo and Paul. So it's great. I love the single and I love about it. So that's my pick of the week. But this is a good opportunity to point out that to have this song on Apple Music is just interesting because there is such a long history, a long and winding road, as it will, of Apple and the Beatles. And I thought I would just sort of comment in front of it. Apple itself, Apple Computer was, started by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak way back when. There's no question in my mind that the title Apple Computer came because Steve Jobs was such a huge fan of the Beatles, and Apple Corps was their record label. And so the company was called Apple. That led, very quickly to a lawsuit filed in 1978 by Apple Corps against Apple Computer. And that lawsuit was settled in 1981. And as a part of the settlement, Apple Computer agreed, we will never release music products. We'll stay out of the music business, and Apple Corps will stay out of the computer business. Sounded like a pretty good deal back in 1981, but
Sure.
fast forward a couple of years,
Yeah.
and Macintosh computers could actually create music, and so there was a second lawsuit that was filed in 1986, and it was eventually settled in 1991. As a part of that settlement, Apple Computer said that, okay, we may have some music, but we won't actually sell or distribute physical musical materials like CDs and records. And Apple Corps said, okay, that was fine. And one of the funny sort of side notes of that was in 1989, one of the guys that works for Apple named Jim Reeks was coming up with the Apple system sounds. And there was one sound that he made, which was sort of like a musical sort of sound. And when they were trying to describe what that sound was called, the name that it has is SOSUMI. And when someone at the legal department at Apple asked him, what is that? He's like, oh, it's a Japanese word. It was not a Japanese word. He made that up. It was SOSUMI. It was him basically sort of giving the finger saying, hey, I'm going to make a musical sound on the Mac as a tone. And if you don't like it, you can go ahead and sue me. So that's sort of a history in Apple music. In fact, this post is funny. You brought up on your screen a post that I wrote way back in 2009. And I thought it was hilarious that I wrote about this guy, Jim Reeks. And at the very end of the post, Jim himself had a little comment where he put a little happy face at the bottom. So I thought that was sort of funny. That, that
look at it.
So then that was the second Apple lawsuit. So then you fast forward until 2003. And what is Apple doing in 2003? The iTunes Music Store. So once again, they were sued by Apple Corps. Now, this time Apple actually won the lawsuit because they weren't distributing physical media. It was all digital, but there was also a related trademark dispute. Anyway, the whole thing ended up settling in what I think is now the final settlement between Apple and the Beatles, where basically Apple Computer, which is now just called Apple, licensed all the music, anything related to music, they've licensed that from Apple Corps. And so from that point forward, the people at Apple, Steve Jobs especially, have always been such huge fans of the Beatles that I know that they hated that there was these decades of litigation between the company because of protecting trademarks. But in 2008, we saw a limited edition version of the iPod that had the Beatles logo on it. In 2010, the Beatles finally released their extensive discography, history of records, and they released it on the iTunes Music Store first, which was a big a big moment. And then, of course, you fast forward to today in 2023, where we have the new single "Now and Then" from the Beatles available through Apple Music. So anyway, it's just Apple and the Beatles have had this intertwined history ever since the 1970s. So whenever they cross paths, I always find it interesting. So anyway, and also it's a good song.
I feel like it's a happy birthday to Microsoft Word and happy birthday to the original Apple lawsuit. Oh, that's incredible, Jeff. This is so fun to hear that whole history on there. We need to just do a podcast on the history aspects. I think there's a
lot of interesting things there. Yeah.
That is so fun on that. But yeah, I forgot. I mean, I know we talked about this, but I had forgotten that this came out. Now I want to go listen to it. We're not going to play it here. Because we don't want Apple suing us for anything on that aspect. But that's just so cool. I just love the whole story behind this. And my wife has actually been a longtime Beatles fan as well. So I don't even know if she's listened to it yet. But yeah, we'll have some lovely evening music listening party tonight. Jeff, as always, thanks, man. And we'll talk with you next week.
Sounds good, Brett. Bye-bye, everybody.